And there he is, Jon Anik, the man who called the match.
Hi,
Hey
John.
guys. Oh, what a pleasure to see your faces. How are you guys?
Oh, excellent. You look fantastic, my friend. This elevation to #1 status looks so good on you. You're wearing it well.
Well, I appreciate it, man. You know, I certainly had a long 5 years learning the bottom half of this roster, and I think it helped me certainly when I got the opportunity to call some of these title fights. It's funny because I don't have any shtick. I don't plan any of my calls, so I think it's kind of liberating in that way. I'm trying to have the moment be its own historical context, and it's nice to be able to cap title fights instead of just main events. It just has a different sort of breadth to it, you know?
I need a headset like that. You sound so professional, and it just sounds so good. And I've always wondered, what's the inside of a Jacksonville hotel room look like? Now we know. Now we know.
And I'm getting to know it all too well. I took my N95 mask off for you boys. What a fight week. What an insane experience this has all been with, you know, I have my wristband for my daily screening for temperatures and everything else. Just a broadcast experience and an atmosphere unlike any I've experienced prior, obviously, you know.
Okay, so let's start with I shouldn't start with the hotel, but I want to start
Let's
the hotel.
do it.
How are hotels operating? Like, what's the procedure in a hotel right now?
So when they do deliver room service, they are masked, they are gloved, they are hanging the bag on the door, and they're taking every necessary precaution. All of the fighters are being screened daily. We just had another influx of fighters and camps come in, right? Because we're doing essentially 75 fighter camps in 8 days. So Sunday and Monday, 25 more camps have arrived. And a lot of us have been here. We've been conditioned to going through the motions, so to speak. That's probably not the best way I could put it. But, you know, you see a lot of people coming in here wide-eyed because they've been quarantined for 60 days. They've been removing their groceries and putting them in Ziploc bags and sanitizing everything. And then you step out of that and you see fighters walking through the lobby taking most but not every precaution. And you can't help but wonder, why did I take those precautions for 60 days if I was going to come on the road and just be exposed to all sorts of people and germs?
So take us through the fight on Saturday. Calling it had to have been extremely surreal for you.
And it was, and it evolved as we went on, because as the night went on, we were starting to hear that Carla Esparza had used Daniel Cormier's commentary as corner advice to actually strategize and help her win a fight. So that sort of inspired me to take my cans off. And dude, his voice was echoing through the entire arena. Certainly there have been times where we've called prelims in Vegas. As you guys well know, boxing and MMA crowds can be late arriving unless you're in those Canadian waters, of course. But in Vegas, people aren't showing up. It's super quiet, but the fighters can't hear your commentary, even though you're draped on the base of the octagon, because there are 300 staffers and 800 fans or whatever it is. They heard most of our every word. And so in between rounds, when I would say, hey, fighter A's corner just told him to do X, Y, and Z, fighter B, it stands to reason, was hearing that. So that's my biggest takeaway, that maybe I'll be a little bit more reserved or aware of maybe where the athletes are in relation to me when I'm spewing commentary. But it's weird without fans, but you guys know when you have the headphones on and you're sort of tunneled in, you're not really thinking about anything else. So I don't know that it affected our calls all that profoundly.
And you guys sounded amazing. I got the pay-per-view, watched every single fight, and I was messaging Ariel Helwani, and I said, did you miss the crowds? He said, actually, and he asked a question. He said, maybe was it better because during a lull in a fight, there was no booing. You could make up your own opinion on whether this fight was going well or not. So there was a uniqueness to it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. You got to think it's a judge's dream, right? Because I think as human beings, you can't help but be swayed, and you hear 25,000 people scream, even if a strike doesn't connect. And we're guilty of that on the broadcast. We can't see all of these strikes in real time. There are plenty of times where I'll be like, oh, and Rogan's like, it didn't land, you know, and that's just the way it goes. So from a judging standpoint, I have to think they like not having any crowd there because they could really hear everything. But I do think it poses some interesting challenges when it comes to the corners. And we'll make a few tweaks and pivots, I think, coming up Wednesday. We obviously have a show here in another couple days, but it was a cool fight atmosphere. There's no doubt about it. But the fans are the lifeblood of this sport. And maybe Rogan and DC don't agree with me, but I'm excited to have them back in full force.
Hey, Sat, do you think that's true? Do you think it's weird because Rogan's a guy who performs in front of sold-out arenas as a stand-up comedian? You'd think he would be the one who would miss it the most.
Right. I think there's certainly something nice about being able to use the restroom if you're Joe Rogan on fight night and not having to battle with people. I mean, I go use a public restroom. As the play-by-play guy, I may get one chance, right? So I have to go to the closest restroom, and you're having conversations with guys and racing back to the octagon. And so, yeah, I think there was sort of a weird feeling in the arena. And for those guys, maybe they liked the liberating nature of the fact that they weren't having to battle fans all night. But, yeah, a unique broadcasting environment, and one that Joe said outwardly that he really wanted to experience. But, yeah, I think for a lot of these athletes, they're, candidly, there are plenty of these athletes that are used to competing on a Wednesday night at a strip club with judges who are smoking cigarettes, right? So I don't think the athletes are going to be as phased as maybe some of us non-athletes, if you will.
Did you sense the UFC, were they nervous since they're the first ones out of the gate in North America back to work?
It's a fair question, but really not at all. I mean, I think you guys sort of know our inner workings pretty well. We're doing 40-plus shows a year all over the world with all different logistical elements. We make live production changes on the fly all the time. Even when Jacare Souza tested positive, that adds 3 hours of work to my plate that night. But we have a lot of different safety and security protocols now that weren't necessarily in place when I joined the company in 2011. When we used to go to Rio de Janeiro, for example, it was a lot safer in 2011 than it is now. So our elevated presence has not been lost on me there. So I just feel like even if it sounds like a guy who gets his paycheck from the company, I feel like if any company was well equipped to return in this type of unforeseen climate, it was probably the UFC. So Dana White and the execs, I'm telling you guys, honestly, they didn't bat an eye.
And speaking of Dana, any direction to you, Dana, in terms of how he wanted you to call the fight, or did he just let you do your thing?
Yeah, he lets us do our thing. Nothing in terms of calling the fight. I think there's a general protocol that we are trying to shine the most positive light on these athletes. And I think by and large, we wanted to keep it on the fighting and not focus so much on everything else. And part of that was a byproduct of just our fighter calls, that a lot of these training camps were uncompromised and not nearly as impacted as maybe we thought they would be. So not to necessarily lean into that narrative, but the fights took care of themselves as they usually do, and gave us plenty to talk about. But yeah, no major directives from the boss, thankfully.
Yeah, Gaethje picked a perfect time for everyone to get to know him now.
It's crazy to think about what his body of work was outside the UFC, right? He did win a major world championship, defended it 5 times. He was undefeated when he came to the UFC, but I think the public perception was that until he really dented this UFC lightweight division, he was not an elite lightweight. And it didn't take him long to resonate with UFC fans, but now he has that signature win and the accompanying UFC interim lightweight belt to go with it. And now his legacy and his legend is entrenched and can never be taken away from him. It couldn't happen to a better guy. He's super thoughtful, as hard a worker as we have in the game. And he's just the real article, man, like John Candy, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. What you see is what you get, I mean, his parents have been at every fight. His dad worked in the copper mines in Arizona. Justin knew a lot of things and knew he didn't want to do that. And look at him now, couldn't be happier for him maximizing the showcase. And, of course, the other side is it's sad to see Tony Ferguson absorb all that damage, but Justin is richly deserving of all the love that's being showered upon him today.
And then you get Khabib, tweeting about the fight. Obviously, he's watching. He knows that Gaethje's coming for him, and you got to be excited as the UFC play-by-play guy to know that this is a fight that's going to happen at some point.
Right.
Though I guess we always thought Tony and Khabib was going to happen at some point, and never did. But yeah, we're assuming Justin and Khabib is going to happen at some point, and that is going to be something, because as Kenny Florian said, John, Justin might be Khabib's toughest matchup.
Yeah, I think matchup-wise, it stands to reason that is the hardest matchup for Khabib. I think there is a recency bias there, and we don't want to just denigrate Tony Ferguson's body of work on the way out. This performance might be an outlier for Tony. I tend to think if Justin Gaethje and Tony fought 10 times, Gaethje would probably have his number 70% of the time based upon what I saw over 20-plus minutes on Saturday night. But fascinating matchup between Khabib and Gaethje. They're managed by the same guy. There's a lot of familiarity there. That fight will happen, though, because Gaethje's the type of guy, and Tony, I guess, and Khabib are too, but he'll fight with a torn ACL to make that fight happen. So I think it's interesting that Justin is a smaller lightweight. So not that he's going to rush to put on muscle or change his style for this fight necessarily, but you do have to do some things conditioning-wise to prepare for being underneath this bear of a human being. So I think Gaethje probably thinks it's an eventuality if he doesn't get him out of there in a couple minutes that he's going to be on the ground, and hip escapes are only going to take you so far. So it'll be the hardest training camp of his life, but he's going to put in the effort, and I think it'll be pretty close according to Vegas. We'll see.
Also on Saturday night, we had a nice surprise. George St Pierre, he's being inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. Sorry, my oven was turned on for some reason. I'm doing this from my kitchen. It's a new world.
Kitchen.
So George St Pierre going into the UFC Hall of Fame, and to hear the fighters talk about him. First off, how many GSP matches have you called, and have you ever seen a fighter in the sport that respected?
So I got to call a couple of his early fights to an international audience, but it was only the Michael Bisping fight that I actually got to do on pay-per-view to an English-speaking audience, I guess, in North America. So only one, but thankful to have gotten that one in. And I don't say it, because of the present company. The best crowds in all of mixed martial arts per capita are in Canada. Those are my best memories calling fights. And even though I didn't get a chance to call George's fights in Canada, I went to many of his fights in Canada, and he brought up an entire sport in a nation. I don't know that there's any precedent whatsoever in all of MMA for what that man accomplished. Most fighters, if you poll our current roster of 600 plus, they believe he's the greatest of all time and not Jon Jones. So you parlay that with what he was able to do in bringing a market to the forefront like that. It was the easiest selection in UFC Hall of Fame history. I'm just praying that he gets his induction ceremony in July, because it's a moment that brings out emotions even in the most stoic. And I really want to see George crack a microphone and get that entire experience. And it's hard to believe sitting here on May 11th that it would happen in July. Maybe they can postpone it till the fall, because he deserves it.
Well, you brought up Jon Jones, John, so I have to walk through that door and ask you about the guy that, a lot of people think right now is still the best pound for pound, but obviously has so many out of the octagon issues. Do you see him coming back again and regaining what he had, or what do you think of Jon at this point?
Well, the last time we saw him in the octagon, it was a very close fight against Dominic Reyes.
Yeah.
And the finishes that define the early part of his career just have not been there recently. If memory serves, I think he has 10 decision wins in the UFC right now, which is a mind-blowing number given the highlight reel that he has put on tape. So I think it's going to be hard for him when he comes back. I think the fights are going to be just as competitive as the last few have been against the likes of Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos. But I absolutely believe he will be back. I don't know if the form that we see is going to be better, but I do think at this point in time, this latest transgression, I just think was disappointing. I think as his daughters get older, it becomes a harder conversation with them, because they are not all knowing, but far more aware of everything that's going on and what some of these words that are being associated with their father actually mean. But man, at the end of the day, when I hear about him just pulling over and talking to homeless people, like, that is Jon in a nutshell. And there's actually a good heart in there that just is so ignorant about what he's doing in that moment that is putting himself in great danger with the law. It's really disappointing that he can't get out of his own way. But I still believe in the athlete. I still believe in the team around him that has put up with a bunch of hell. I'm hopeful, but not as optimistic as I've been, obviously, times prior.
Okay, Jon, I have a theory. Just hear me out. It's the Apollo Creed Rocky III theory, in that the man who will save Jon Jones in the end will be Daniel Cormier. Cormier will get into his corner, because I remember, I think it was the third time they fought, when Jon Jones said in the octagon, the only kind of show of respect he kind of gave him, he said, I want to be more like this man. I want to be like this man. And it made me think there's a little crack open there, a little door open there to maybe these guys getting together, maybe DC getting in there, talking some sense into him.
I remember that well, and I'm happy to hear you bring it up. They're certainly not in any sort of place that they were then, right? It's deteriorated further, I think, because there have been further episodes. But that's very interesting, because there was a time when I sat between Jon Jones and Rashad Evans, who were teammates, right? I mean, Daniel Cormier and Jon Jones were never teammates, but there was a time the friction between Rashad Evans and Jon Jones was so palpable and so real that if you would have told me they would come to a place where they could bury the hatchet, I would have told you there's just no way, Jay. So I think it stands to reason that they could eventually display some mutual respect. Never work together, certainly, but I just think right now there's nothing fabricated about that animosity, and I wish I wasn't wearing my Daniel Cormier shirt right now, because I love me some Johnny Bones, but no, I just don't see it with those two. But I'm hopeful that Jon will I mean, when I was 27, like I was an idiot, but he's not 27 anymore. I mean, that used to be part of his excuse. I don't know that he can make that anymore.
So, Jon, before we let you go, I have two questions. Did they put you in a hotel room with two beds? So does that mean you have a roommate? And also, have you had a nasal swab, the ones where they touch your brain?
So I don't know about the two double beds. I usually get the king, but I was just so happy to get into a room that was clean and not occupied that I didn't ask too many questions. I actually had to have two nasal swabs within 12 hours. First one, I took like a champion. Second one, not so brave, a little bit of a choke. I just think the nostril was a little bit inflamed, and my first result hadn't come back yet, and we needed things expedited because I had to get on television. So I took a second swab, and that was super unpleasant. It follows your anatomy, basically, as you guys probably know. So it doesn't feel like it hits your eye cavity, but it does feel like it's in your forehead. So there's nothing pleasant about it, but it's funny to see these fighters freaking out. Like Paul Felder just got here and he's like, dude, I got to talk to you about the nasal swab. It's like, bro, you just went to New Zealand and fought Dan Hooker for 25 minutes and you're worried about this 8 seconds. I don't know what to tell
But
you.
here's the thing, Jon. So Tony Ferguson shot his nasal swab, and we can't really see it that well because we're doing the show from our homes. And it was on a loop during our show, and we showed it like 4 or 5 times. I watched it when the show aired, and I almost threw up. I had to turn away because it is that uncomfortable to see.
Yeah, no, it's not pleasant. And I think for the fighters who have broken their nose several times, some of the people who are administering the test were worried that some of those nasal cavities that have been compromised would make for a tougher path on the way up. But, some of these nurses are trying to make it quick and painless, and others are taking their sweet time. I mean, my second swab was like 16 seconds. So, I think there is some bedside manner and some who are better than others, not unlike an IV. But we got through it. I mean, but again, it's like I'm going to probably have to take several more of these as we continue to go along here. So,
Man, Jon, it's so great to see it. I'm so proud of all your success, man. You're just the
thank
best.
you. I got to tell you guys, I mean, I know in the U.S. there were so many people that were upset when you guys left, but I think I was probably more upset than any American. I was a P1 viewer of you guys. You were exactly what we needed, and I miss you guys every day, and I'm happy to see your faces, of course.
Oh, you're a nice man. Thanks for saying those things. All of that was a lie, but we appreciate it.
That's a fact.
Hey, enjoy Jacksonville. We hear it's the vacation capital of Jacksonville.
One of the worst cities in the continental U.S. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jon.
We
guys.
heard when they hosted a Super Bowl, it was not a good experience.
I was here in 2005. It's no better now. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Jon.
See you, boys. Thank you.
Jon. Bye-bye.